Hello, my name is Ian Watson. I'm currently a Director Emeritus of the American Membrane Technology Association, or AMTA. The interview you're about to see is the 27th in a series that we call Chats with the Pioneers. AMTA is a technical association founded on the advocacy of the use of membrane technology for water treatment, from wastewater reclamation to seawater desalination. The heart of this technology is the membrane itself. About 2.5 years ago, our board of directors decided that to preserve the history of the membrane and membrane system development, the association should make an effort to record these chats with those responsible for launching what is now a worldwide technology in common use. AMTA's intent is to make these segments available on its website so that a new generation of engineers and scientists can understand the efforts of these pioneers to help solve some of the water issues in the world today. With me today, we have 4 gentlemen who worked for a company called Ionics. On my immediate right is Mr. Ark Pang. Next to him is Bill Katz, and Eddie Geishecker, and Bernie Mack. To start off, I'd like to ask each of you, if you would, to give us a brief introduction of yourself and your background, education, and work experience. Ark, let's start with you.
Ark Pang, been in the, let's say, the industry for over 40 years. Graduated as a chemical engineer from City College, New York, School of Engineering in '71. Did a stench in the draft into the Army for a couple of years. Then I started working at DuPont as a chemical engineer down in Linden, New Jersey, as a true engineer. Decided after 4 years of that I should do some business development, and I joined Permuted Water Company in Paramus, New Jersey. And there is when I got my taste of the membrane industry. First project was City of Cape Coral, which I won with Dow Membranes. My mentor there was Bob Quinn. I worked with the likes of Bill Hendershore at the time, and then I left there in '81 to join Ionics when it was a small company, and met the gentlemen here. They're all my mentors and colleagues, particularly Bill, who was my mentor for many years there, and worked there 25 years. Exciting project. Probably visited 90 countries around the world, knocking on doors, trying to sell EDR systems and eventually RO systems when it was sacred to do. And then when GE acquired Ionics in 2005, I worked for GE for about 1 year and 2 months. Decided, great company, but decided I liked the excitement of working with a company with Ionics, grow something. So 4 senior executives, we left, started our consulting firm, and we're doing consulting business today.
Good, that's good, good. Bill?
I graduated from MIT in 1948. I started actually before the war, and I was in World War II overseas, but I don't think that's relevant to this discussion. And when I joined Ionics, we had 20 employees. I was the 21st, and I was the only chemical engineer. I'd got my degree in chemical engineering from MIT. I had a little trouble getting a job, but Ed Gilliland was acting as president of Ionics at the time, and he took pity on me and gave me the job there. So I worked for Ionics from 1949 till I retired in the early 70s, 1971 or 2. And in that period, we grew from 20 people to several thousand, with groups all over the world. I had a lot to do with overseas work. I traveled a lot to Europe. We acquired a company called Italba there, which was a key company in the early days. And I don't know what else to say, except I was involved in a lot of the early sales of electrodialysis equipment to, in the beginning, one of the few people that were willing to take a chance with the new technology was the U.S. Army and the Navy. So we did some work for submarines, and we also did a lot of AC and W stations, which were the type of stations that they had across the country to ward off, presumably, any attacks from Russia, or I guess before Russia, even from Germany. I could go on at some length, but I believe that that's probably enough. I certainly remember Art Pang and Eddie Geishecker and Bernie Mack, because they were all integral in the development of ionics and the development of electrodialysis, and later on to our small things in reverse osmosis.
Good. Good. Ed?
Okay, I have a bachelor's degree from UConn, a master's degree from Ohio State. And after I left Ohio State, I got drafted into the Army. Where else? And then when I left there, I got a job for a company called CP as a sales engineer. But in 1970, approximately, I joined Ionics in cheese whey desalting. Spent several years there until I joined the water group, and eventually took over sales in the United States, running around the whole country, both field service, installation, and sales. Had to rely on Bill for product development, and I retired in the year 2000 after a little over 30 years, actually, at Ionics.
Good. Good. Bernie?
Well, Bernie Mack. I graduated from Imperial College London in 1971. Had a bit of difficulty getting work after graduating at that time, but I ended up working in municipal wastewater, and from there I decided to go into a commercial company called Davy Water Engineering and work for them as a senior commissioning engineer, working in Ireland and South Africa at the time. In 1978, I joined Ionics and to work for them in Libya at that time, which was an opening location. So basically, I worked for Ionics until GE took over, and then I stayed with Ionics. Well, I stayed with GE until 2007, and now I've gone on to work for Veolia. But in the time I worked for Ionics, I was primarily working outside the US. You know, very little activity within the US, and over the years I've gone to more than 40 countries for Ionics.
It's funny you should mention when I graduated in the UK, I had difficulty getting a job too, which is why I'm here.
Actually,
I guess they don't like engineers in the UK.
Early 70s was a tough time to get a job.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that I found when I went back to a reunion and met with my professor of chemical engineering, and the professor of chemical engineering turned around to me and said, "What's chemical engineering about water?" My response was, "It's water is the perfect solvent."
Bill, I'll ask you, since you were one of the early members of the company, how did Ionics come about?
Well, Walter Judah, who is unfortunately dead now, was really the technical brains behind Ionics. And he was born in Germany, and because of the Hitler thing, he had to get out. As I recall, he went to France at that point, where he met his wife, who I think had an important role during the war in in undermining the Nazi thing. But he finally got over to this country. I didn't know exactly how, because I didn't know him in those days. But as soon as he got here, he began to do some work at MIT. And I think that's where he came to the attention of George Dorio, who was the big man of American research and development, out of which ionics was formed. And so I think that's probably enough to say about that. But Walter Juda was a very important man because he really came up with the idea of the electrodialysis membrane and started that work. And he was the leading light technically at ionics for many years until he left. I think he left fairly early, maybe in, say, the 21st year of ionics out of, say, 50 or so.
Well, what year was ionics born?
Ionics was born, I think, about a year before I joined it, which was I joined them in 49. I think they were formed in 48. And at that point, what kept them alive was they had a subcontract with Tracer Lab, which is also funded by American Research. But the first thing that they really came up with was the electrodialysis idea that they developed while I was there. Or, of course, I was there for most of the time, but.
And when you joined ionics, was it a commercial product, or was it still in the
when I joined ionics,
phase?
it was a research and development lab, basically.
Right.
And they were doing this Tracer Lab subcontract. And I think on the side, Walter was involved with the development of electrodialysis, which was sort of done as part of, I guess it was almost bootlegged, because there wasn't any money involved in doing it in those days.
Was it originally conceived as a method of desalination, or was it conceived for some other purpose?
No, it was conceived as for desalination, and that's the major use of it. In the end, was also for desalination. As Eddie Geishecker mentioned earlier, there were a few other applications, including milk processing, but that never amounted to very much, did it?
Well, the cheese whey.
The cheese whey did amount to quite a bit, but compared with desalting water, it was
Small.
It was small.
Yeah. Now, I remember when I first went to Sanibel, we used to have folks come down from some of your overseas clients for training.
Yes.
And a large number of those came from Libya.
Yes.
Where you had some early success, I believe. Yeah. Bernie, would you like to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. Well, when I joined joined Ionics, I went to work in Libya. Basically, we had a project to install a large number of municipal drinking water plants around the country. It's quite an exciting time because you had to learn to navigate yourself around the country, and not always easy when you don't read the signs.
I should add one thing here. One of the people who's not present but who was very, very important was Ted Giles. Ted Giles is a guy who was a Boston Boston suburb figure, and I hired him at the urging of one of our senior directors. And Ted was with Ionics for years until he finally retired, and he died not too long thereafter. But what Ted did was he went overseas at a time when there were really only two markets. There was a big market overseas and a very small market in the States. I was involved in the States, and he was involved in the overseas market. And Ted went to Bahrain and Saudi Arabia and Libya and all these places. I can remember trying to talk with him at a time when if you wanted to make a telephone call to the United States from Bahrain, you know, you had to wait and for a certain time and then hope that it would go through and all that sort of thing. But Ted Gile was a very, very important man in the development of the overseas market, which turned out to be the big market for desalting.
Right, right.
Yeah, I worked as the inside person for Ted for quite a number of years. That he was running around the world when they do all the calculations on the plant and make sure the proposals get going. While Ted was getting the information and doing the running around.
Yeah, because you in the early days, the 50s and 60s, I guess, primarily, you sold a lot of equipment into the Middle East.
Yes.
Somebody, I think,
Right.
Floyd Mellor told me one time, like
Ionics
700,
would have not
700
made it.
plants or something like that.
All through the Middle East,
Yeah.
from North Africa right to Baghdad.
Right.
Morocco.
Ted Gile basically pioneered almost all of this. And
So how long did it take to get from the concept stage to the point where you early Ionics employees felt that you had a product that you could commercialize?
well, we kept looking for places that we could use it in the United States. There were not very few, because the one thing that electrodialysis was very good for was what we call brackish water, which happened to be well water in many parts of the country. And we first of all had to find municipalities or other places where they needed fresh water but they couldn't get it. And so I was involved in many of the early things. For example, Coalinga, California, which was the very first municipal application of membrane desalting. And there, Coalinga is a strange town in California because they had two water systems to begin with. They had one system which is used for everything, which was brackish water. It was a couple thousand parts per million. It was pretty unpleasant. And then they hauled in drinking water on the train. And they had a separate small bore distribution system for that. And what we did is we showed them that you could hook up one of our units from the brackish water and make fresh water. And that's the first municipal use of electrodialysis anywhere, I think, in the United States. And that was done, I don't remember the date now, but it was very early on. It was after, and then we had to look for another place where we could do it full bore, and that was Buckeye, Arizona.
Yeah, right.
And Buckeye, Arizona, we were able to treat all of the water. And that was a pioneering system, too.
Hmm.
Meanwhile, to make money, it turned out that the U.S. government was putting in these distributed systems to keep out Russian or presumed Russian incursions in the United States. So they had them all across the northern country, and we sold many equipments there in Montana and Illinois, all across the northern border. And then later on, when they began to build the big systems which would launch powerful bombs against the Russians, we had some big jobs in South Dakota and in Arizona, and those jobs were very large. They were, in those days, a couple $100,000 was a lot of money.
Yeah.
Or even some of them went to a couple $1 million. And I was selling all of that sort of thing when Ted Guile was out selling the stuff in the foreign countries with the oil money, and that was good, very good.
So, Ark, you started at Permuted,
Yes, I did.
and you mentioned a couple of names that are well known to me, Bob Quinn being one of them, Bill Hendisher, of course.
Of course, yes.
Has moved to Florida.
That's right.
With Paul Culler and started...
Around the late 70s.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
And started Basic Technologies and went on to own his own company. And but you went from RO to electrodialysis.
Yeah.
And I remember in those days there was many debates, most of them stirred up by Dick Smith, about the relative merits of both technologies. What was your impression when you first went to Ionics? Did you think that it was
Well,
as good as or better than RO at that time?
I sort of joined Ionics out of default, okay, because the RO industry, basically, I would say in the mid-'70s, was getting into its commercialization. Big plants finally coming born. But I mentioned that I left DuPont. I think a month after I left DuPont, I got a spec on my desk for City of Cape Coral. Never designed a plant in my life, and I sat down and did the DuPont chemical engineering. Engineers always had, the old engineers had a drawing board behind you.
Yep.
Got on my drawing board and drew out the P&Is and things like that, and won the project.
Yep.
And then you got that, wow, I won, this is pretty good, and went on to do many other projects. But then Permuted in I think 1980, was acquired by Zurn Corporation. And Bob Quinn, who's 20 years my senior, but also graduate City College, asked me on a Thursday, and I've been only married about a year and a half. He says, I know you're a little restless, Ark. I know you so often said that you were going to resign. I'd be appreciative if you would resign so I can stay on with Zurn for another 6 months to grow my consulting business. So I said to my wife, I resigned on a Thursday. I agreed on the Thursday, and I resigned on a Friday. And then I went out for the search for a job. Now, all the RO jobs, so-called jobs, were on the West Coast. My wife didn't want to go to the West Coast because we're from New York, New Jersey, New York. So I went out to the search to Water Service America in Milwaukee. Right. And we went at the worst time of year. It was like February. It was too cold for my wife. Then I went down to Houston to see Matito. I think Don Drysdale, I think his name. He put us up in the Woodlands, first class. It was too hot in June for her. And so I called Bill. I called Pat Lamb, and I called Kay Ketchadorian. I said, I'm a little desperate for a job. And they said, come up and sit at Ionics. And that's where I ended up. It was a great thing, but, sort of by default I went. And I was a frustrated RO engineer sitting in a realm of EDR, going around the world, convincing people EDR is the thing. But in the back of my mind says, the growth is in RO. And eventually it was agreed that we'll do some RO systems. And I think the first major taste of RO was the seawater BOT project we did at Maspalomas. And it was a major project.
Is that right?
Yeah, it was sort of, we pioneered as Ionics, which many people don't know, we pioneered the whole concept of seawater desalination and selling water. And we would own it. We would own it.
I remember that.
In those days, we would balance sheet the financing, or we put as recourse financing. Today, we always look for non-recourse financing, but that was the start. And then I think from that start, I went on to, with Ionics, and now with the work I'm doing now, looking at investment projects to sell water. Okay,
right.
So,
Right. Yeah, I remember that, in fact, Mr. Katz here won an award from the WISIA as being the instigator of the BOT projects. Do you remember that?
I don't remember that.
That was, when was that, Doug?
That was a long time ago.
That was back in the, I think in
In the 80s.
probably the early 80s.
In the early 80s.
Early 80s,
Yeah.
But
It was ironic because you and Dick Smith won an award in the same year at the same conference.
Yes. Is Dick Smith still alive?
No.
No, I didn't think so, but I wasn't sure.
No.
But I give credit to Ionics, because when I joined, I think in 1981, our turnover was like $19 million.
Yeah.
It was some small amount. And then in '84, we signed major contracts in Baghdad with Dora Refinery. We were doing build and own and operate projects, and we're very adventurous, and has always been a very adventurous company.
And you got the project in Santa Barbara.
Oh,
Santa
yeah.
Barbara,
Yeah, which was
Well, I was very much involved in that.
yeah, you were. You were.
And Santa Barbara, 91.
I remember when I first met you guys, when I went to work for the Island Water Association, and Larry Snell and I came up to Boston, to Watertown, to meet with you about the performance, or what we perceived as lack thereof, of the Sanibel project.
Ah.
I remember that because that was the first time I'd met you, and one of your negotiating gambits, which I saw several times thereafter, was that you would put your glasses up here and pull out your circular slide rule and do calculations on your circular slide rule. Do you still have that?
I still have it, but I don't use it very much anymore. As a matter of fact, when I quit Ionics, and my quitting was spread out because I was a director longer than I was an employee, but I wanted to make sure that Doug Brown, who had worked for me, would become chairman of Ionics, and I stayed around long enough for that. And then I had to retire because of the age thing. I think I was 75. And
when the first membranes that you were making and the performance of the units, what sort of voltages and amps were you operating at to get?
oh boy, well, the voltage would depend on how many units there were in between electrodes. If I remember correctly, though, we were up around 400 or 500, weren't we?
Yeah.
500 was pretty close to the max.
Yeah, and that was like
It's about a volt a cell pair.
yeah,
That's
about
what I
a volt
recall.
per cell pair, and there was about 500 cell pairs. And we sold some large plants in this country, in Florida mostly, and the plant that we built in Santa Barbara was a reverse osmosis plant. It wasn't a,
Right.
but I think electrodialysis probably doesn't have very much of a future compared with reverse osmosis. I mean, I think that's been true for quite a few years.
I think in latter years it's sort of found its niche
Yeah.
for, let's say, nitrate removal.
Higher concentrations of the brine.
High silica
Yeah.
water,
Yeah.
that kind of thing, yeah.
But I don't know that there's very much. I don't know what the worldwide sale of it is today. I have no idea.
Well, I think today the market for electrodialysis that people are looking at is how to reduce the demand or reduce the need for a evaporator. You know, if you want to go to zero liquid discharge, can you concentrate stuff until you can go to a crystallizer directly?
Well, the last major plant was in Barcelona, which is very specific to some constituents in the water.
Right.
you know.
That was a very, very specific bromide.
I think
that's a very large
electrodialysis
plant.
does have some
very large,
uses,
yeah.
but whether there's enough usage there to support a big industry or even a small industry, I don't know.
Yeah.
Probably not.
Yeah.
Probably not the likes of GE owning it, but
Right.
there are smaller companies like Mega in the Czech that might make some money out of it.
I think GE, although I think they made a mistake when they tried to get into the business with Ionics, and I don't think they've done very well with it. I could be wrong, but I don't think I'm not aware of any big plants that they've even built. Are you?
They basically, not so long ago, decided to pull out of all the big plant businesses and basically just sell their standard units out of that Osmotec used to build.
The osmotics
Osmotics used to build.
type products. That they're basically not competing in the form that ionics used to be in terms of the
Build, own, operate.
build, own, operate type of.
Right.
Well, they made an effort initially.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, I think they
did the
made a
job
major effort,
in
but-
Algeria and
Well,
other
I would say the
places.
job in Algeria, because we were personally involved in Algeria, that was 90% pregnant when they acquired us.
Oh, is that right?
And they just, and if anything, I don't know if I should say this on camera, but if anything, they wanted to relook at the deal. We spent an extra $2 million in legal fees, and it came out to the same result, and we closed the deal.
One of the interesting comments that when GE acquired Ionics, the first technical meeting that they had in Schenectady, one of the senior people in the water group stood up and said, "We are not in the municipal water business." So I had to say to them at that point, "You've acquired Ionics. You are most definitely in the municipal water business."
I think the issue, again, I don't want to maybe not say this on camera, but an issue is that they didn't want to be perceived as a utility, because that's just nothing value on their shareholdings.
I don't know. I owned some shares of GE way back, and I sold them, but I don't think that they're getting involved in this business ever really made a nickel for them.
No. Well, they have. I mean, they made just about the same time. They acquired Xenon
Yeah.
for a lot of money.
Oh, yeah.
A lot more than I personally think it was worth. But I'm sure Andrew would disagree with me.
In fact, if you look at the market today, even though I'm not really up on it for desalting, it's still maybe big plants, but there are a few here and a few there, and I don't think that fits into a business plan for a company like GE.
No,
I could be wrong,
that's right.
but I don't think so. I think it's good for the companies like ARC and his colleagues are involved in, or you're maybe involved in, where it's a few guys that know what they're doing, and when there's a big job, they build it, and then once in a while they get it, and that's it. I don't even know if the market has grown, in fact.
I think the market has grown.
Yes, it has.
But it's interesting, I think, that in spite of the fact that you're getting, the plants are getting larger, you still have OEMs like Jimmy Hearn, which is a 20-person firm, building 15, 20 million gallon a day
That's right.
equipment.
That's right.
They do. And I think the market has changed in the sense that the big market, one of the big markets has always been the Middle East.
Yeah.
And for the longest time, the Middle East would not touch an RO system because of issues and failures of the DuPont B10 membrane way back when. So they stayed with evaporators. Now you see a resurgence of the RO membranes in the Middle East, partly because at $100 a barrel, why burn fuel to run the evaporators? And you can run your excess power, which is you don't need at night, and you can run an RO system and make water. So it's that water management that's happening in the field. So.
Right. So it may be even a very large market, but it's still an episodic market. And the big money is in the big plants.
And I'm not at all sure, and you'd know better than I are, but I'm not at all sure that the large boot projects that would, I mean, they're talking about, 100 million gallon a day projects now for seawater. I'm not so sure that they're as profitable as the people had hoped they would be.
Well, for the ones I've been on, they've been fairly profitable.
Well, but that's because they had you helping them.
But I think what happened is, we as Ionics, we got involved in what I consider many of the first ventures, like Mas Palomas was the first one, very, very profitable venture. Even the Hama project was a first venture. Many of the seawater projects in the Caribbean were first ventures.
Right.
the Sulabia project in Kuwait, which we did and started to do in 2000, which we're doing the expansion now, you know, with the firm I'm consulting with right now, that has always been a very profitable venture. So from our view, from our perspective, it has been a good business, but it has become a very competitive business. So do you find us jumping in to every opportunity? No, we don't. We become extremely selective in what we do.
Right. When I remember when I was at Sanibel, our original spacers were die cut, and then you went to a molded spacer, and then you went back to die cut spacer.
Mm-hmm.
And we had, I forget, we had 8 trains at Sanibel. 1, 2, 3, 4, 8 trains at Sanibel. And we had some with die cut spacers and some with molded spacers. And then a couple of my less than enthusiastic operators decided that they were going to build a stack with both of them in.
Oh.
And it was a disaster. But was there an issue with the molded spacers?
I don't really remember.
There was a tolerance on, talking to Tom Kirkham, there was a tolerance of thickness on the spacer. And it was very difficult by molding them to keep that within the proper tolerance. And it just, they couldn't mix it with the die cuts.
If you don't have the proper tolerance, that stack sort of leans.
The thing is, if you looked at the molded spacer and really examined it very closely, what happened was that the mold, you know, because of the molding process, the high points were always in the same place. So that when you assembled the stack, yes, you could play around a little bit with it. You had some degrees of freedom, but when you built the stack, you tended to find that there was a high point in the spacer, in the assembly, and you had a hard time sealing the stack.
You couldn't seal the stack, right.
So it went through a lot of iterations of how do you put the spacers in. You know, there's 4 orientations of the spacer, but you can manipulate some of those high points out. I remember having to work on a lot of stacks, and at one point we were using matchsticks to plug leaks in the side of a stack. But the uniformity of the die cut. One of the things you had with the die cut, you had this layer of glue, which actually acted more like a gasket. Because you had 2 pieces of die cut material with a layer of glue in between, and that acted quite well as a gasket. So you didn't have
some compression when you were pulling the stack together.
Right.
Yeah. I never thought that was. Yeah, that's right. See, one of the more interesting projects I was involved in was testing we did at down in Virginia, and we were testing electrodialysis reversal and reverse osmosis. It's a high recovery system, fairly low TDS water. And after we finished piloting, the operating staff elected to use electrodialysis. And that really surprised me. But that plant has been expanded.
What plant is that?
Suffolk, city of Suffolk.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if you were still
No,
there.
I don't think I was there.
No, you were there. I sold that plant.
Yeah, I
it
visited
sold that
that. Very nice plant.
It's
yes.
still working.
It's still working, and they
and
just
expanded
expanded it. Yeah.
They're sending the water over to Smithfield.
Where was the water from?
That was the
Well,
ground.
It was from a
Well
well.
water.
Yeah.
But I was a board member at the International Water Conference, and I just looked at papers they're going to be giving down in Florida, and I noticed there was papers on EDI. There was a education section on EDI, and there's a number of papers of RO. I didn't really look to see where they were from, and it didn't go into details. But from an industrial point of view, they were still pushing the RO.
Yeah.
And EDI.
Right.
Don't ask me where the paper is. I didn't look for the details.
Yesterday, we talked to Mel Lou and Sid Johnson from the old OSW days. And Sid Johnson said that one of his greatest regrets was that he was unable to get piezodialysis to work the way he theoretically thought it should work. Now, I don't know very much about, in fact, I know very little about piezodialysis, but I thought I would ask you guys if you ever looked at that technology.
If they did, I wasn't aware of it.
They did look at it, but I don't know really what happened. It was not a big item. In other words, let me just take a quick look and.
Is it related to electrodialysis?
Somewhat. Dick Parent looked at it, and it just didn't go very far. I don't know the details.
Does anybody know where Dick Parent is?
No, we tried to contact him, I think. Doug couldn't find him.
Bob Allison would probably be the only one that would know where he is. I don't know.
Yeah, we talked to Bob. Bob initially said he would participate, and then he declined for some reason.
He went on vacation to Canada.
Yeah,
Yeah,
probably.
he went up to Upper Maine.
Yeah. When Ark mentioned Barcelona, which is, a huge plant, did you ever think that one day electrodialysis would be used in a plant of 70 MGD?
Yeah, that's
Or did you think that was beyond the capabilities of the technology?
Oh no, I didn't think that there was anything. I mean, it was just a question of how many stacks you would use, and I think the more stacks you had, the more you could set up a stack repair facility on site. I never thought there was any limit like that. Certainly, reverse osmosis is the same thing. It's just a bunch of modules, and it's a question of how many modules.
But there are some hydraulic considerations.
The thing is, when we were looking at the project, we started out looking at the project, and we had to do a very detailed look at the hydraulics of that sort of system. We had a basic unit that we could use as a, we had a 100, what we called a 100 unit.
Aquamite 100.
Aquamite 100, and basically what we did was we took that basic design and made it into a 400 effectively, but there was a lot of piping exercises that had to be dealt with on that. And in actual fact, I remember I had one of our guys, Chris, from one of our RO guys, go and join the team that was looking at the project. And I said to him, you know how to move lots of water around. You've had experience designing systems to move a large amount of water. These guys know how to operate electrodialysis. I need somebody who can look at the water, moving the water, and advise the people who are doing the electrodialysis, because that was a major difference between doing what we've been doing in the past to what was Barcelona.
Yeah, that's river water, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's river water.
Yeah, it's interesting. I hadn't really heard about it until it was almost completed, and then
it was done also in the midst of this Aquamet project, where there were a number of seawater RO systems also built at the same time. But for this specific application, EDR made sense.
The basic purpose of the plant is to minimize the formation of bromoforms. So basically, they had a situation where they had organics in the water, and they needed and bromine in the water, and whenever they chlorinated the water, you had excessive bromoforms formed. So by basically using electrodialysis, they were able to remove some of the organics and the bromine, so that they could do the they could then chlorinate the water.
And that's actually bromide removal is a better application for EDR than it is for RO. So RO doesn't reject bromide very well.
Electrodialysis. Bromide just whistles through an electrodialysis membrane.
And high recovery operation on high silica waters.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
But boy, that limits it, you know, to a very, I don't know if there's another place in the world where bromine is.
No, it's true. I think what has, you know, Ionics, with all the work that was done in the old days with Bill and Ted Guile, we were there at the right time when the RO wasn't there.
That's right.
And they were selling like gangbusters.
That's right.
ED,
That's right.
ED, and eventually EDR system.
Right.
Eventually.
No question that we had the market for a long time.
And then even when RO was becoming commercialized, RO had its scaling issues and various issues which didn't quite fit well in the Middle East, and we continued selling in the Middle East because they were high scaling waters. But with the higher salinity waters, the better understanding by RO how to control the scale with the anti-scalants, and the higher power consumption of the EDR, you saw that shift sometime in the 80s, that shift that was making it much more difficult. And it was inevitable that Ionics would be an RO EDR company.
But you resisted it for a long time.
Yeah, we did. I mean, you know, it
was blasphemy to say that when I joined
right.
anyone.
That's right. It took us a while.
Yeah, and there, you know, I could see that point of view because, you know, RO in the early days, I mean, Florida plants are easy.
Piece of cake.
Piece of cake. But if you get out of Florida, you know, RO sometimes is hard to apply.
Yeah.
And requires a lot of extra pretreatment you don't need with electrodialysis.
And you know, our selling point was you were high recovery. If it fouled, you can tear it apart, scrape it, put it back together. You know, so there was a lot of selling points.
Yeah, not only that, but some of the early plants in Florida had terrible problems. I mean, one of them, the one that's near Tampa, it's still not running right, is it? I don't know if it is.
I mean, the Seawood plant?
Yeah.
Oh, it's up and running. They spent a lot more money.
Yeah, I mean, but I don't know. For a long time, it wasn't even up and running.
Yeah, and they actually don't use it very much.
No.
Yeah.
They run like one train for half a day just to
Well,
keep
that's
it wet.
the problem with any system of seawater desalting. If there's a cheaper alternative, they're going to use it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's what killed us in Santa Barbara, because they finally finished a pipeline.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean to say, there's the saying that if you want to break a drought, build a seawater desalination plant.
You see this all through Australia. They built all these plants.
That's right.
The only place in Australia where it hasn't happened is Perth.
Yeah.
You know, everywhere else, as soon as you finish building it, you get ready to put the water into the distribution network, and it rains.
Well, Perth
Does
is
anybody
always dry.
know whether Dick Fiedler is alive?
Don't know.
You don't know?
I have no idea.
Because Dick Fiedler, we sent him to Western Australia way back.
Broome.
I forget what the name of the...
Broome, yes.
But he wasn't... They weren't buying then. And I guess now they have quite a few RO plants out there, or do they?
They do, but but I remember in the early 80s when we were traveling Australia, we sold Ayers Rock, we sold a number of plants in Alice Springs.
Yeah, I remember one of the plants that we had in Australia. It was a gas gathering centre in a place called Moomba.
Mumbai, yeah.
And we used
With Western Mining.
The service guys called it the Vaseline plant, because every so often you have to go out in, take the stack apart, and when you had a squeegee and a bucket, and you squeegeed the membranes and put the liquid that came off in a bucket, and what you had in the bucket was almost like a Vaseline.
Now imagine if that was an RO plant.
Oh yeah.
It would have been a total disaster.
Oh yeah, that's right. That's right.
The plant worked. Worked as it went downhill, and when you came in, you had to. That was the only plant where I needed a squeegee. You had to squeegee the membranes.
Well, the high recovery, you mentioned high recovery. High recovery aspect was important. That's what sold Sarasota.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Brazos River, I think.
Yeah.
Was it?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And the phase reversal technology, which was the new twist on the conventional ED, was
You know, you had
all
the
these
ED,
innovations that we needed to keep
ED,
selling.
the ED, the EDR with phase reversal.
And then the triple membrane, which Bill was very much involved in.
Yeah, that's one of my questions. I was going to ask you about the triple membrane. That came out, and it was kind of a neat slogan, the triple membrane process.
Well, let's face it, in order to sell something, we had to figure out what it was that it would need it, and that's the way it worked. But
they were very successful.
in the end, yeah, they were successful, but it was a small market, relatively.
Yeah.
The nuclear plants.
Yeah.
One of the things that I think a lot of people don't realise about the water business is that you have so many different waters, and you have so many different water quality requirements. And getting from A to B, when A is always a moving target and B is always a moving target, isn't like building a diesel engine.
Right.
You can't build it as a widget.
Right. Right.
I think
that's what's so fascinating about the business,
Yeah.
at least for me.
In the end, that's why I think what ARC has done and Bernie has done makes more sense, and that is you want small companies, not big companies, that take advantage of whatever the peculiarity of a given job is, or else they don't even bid it.
Flexibility.
And if you decide there's a project that would interest a client, then you bring together your advisors, you bring your engineering firms together, you bring your technology firms together, and we go after it.
Ionics, and you've already mentioned it in passing a couple of times, but Ionics was one of the early, if not the earliest, firm to pursue, build, own, and operate facilities. How did you decide to get into that business?
I recall, in like in '84, '85, we got the mandate from the board that, because we were selling equipment. We were all packing a suitcase, going around selling equipment, and that we wanted to go into the what we call 50-50 strategy, where half our income will come from service business. So we got the mandate, I think, for $100 million from the board in '84, '85 to go out and get us into the service business. That's when you went out and looked for Pure Solutions and Ultra Pure and the ion exchange regeneration business. We went into the AquaCool bottled water business. That was all part of this. We got to get into the service business, and a spin-off of that was to look at, rather than selling equipment to water merchants, we'll be a water merchant. Because a lot of water merchants in the Middle East made a lot of money from our water that we produced for them, and we began to say we should be able to sell this water. We have the technology, so we did that at Maspalomas. We did that throughout the Canaries, Santa Barbara, whenever there was an opportunity. Then there was the Hama project that we did in 2004, but I think a very significant project, spin-off of the triple membrane system, UFRO, is we took that and we went and did a major water reclamation plant. At the time, over 100 million gallons a day. Still today, one of the largest plants, using treating secondary treated water, using NORIT membranes, followed by Torre membranes, which we half made in Boston, because we had the joint venture to make Torre membranes also. We dabbled in that also. And that plant's still up and running. And
that was in Kuwait, right?
In Kuwait.
Yeah.
In Kuwait, we treat 60% of Kuwait City's sewage water conventionally, and then with UFRO. And now we're going to take that plant and take it from 375,000 cubic meters a day. And the next 18 months, we'll be treating 600,000 cubic meters.
And what do you do with the product water?
The product water goes out, and because it's such high quality water, one of the original concepts was it was going to be utility water, or general water for landscaping. It's used basically for produce farming in the region.
One of the spin-offs from the build, own, operate was that basically we had to we had the problem of operating the plant.
Of course.
So
And you learn a lot.
you actually learn more about your equipment than
Exactly.
you learn how to make it better.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that reminds me of the cartoon. You know, these 4 or 5 guys sitting around this widget saying, "Well, now we built it. What the hell are we going to do with it?"
And I think for the very fact that, you know, Ionics was a technology company, the very fact we operate a lot of plants, there's a lot of graduates of Ionics, some of them sitting here, that are probably not the same type of water engineers today. We have a feel for the plants.
Right.
Yes.
One name you mentioned was Kay Kachadorian.
Yes.
He was at Ionics for quite a while.
He joined in, I think, 78, I think.
77.
And wasn't he also at Permuted?
He worked for me in Permuted.
Did he?
And the first
I
day,
didn't know that.
yeah, he worked for me in Permuted. In 75 he joined. Oscar also worked for me in Permuted.
I
I worked
see.
with Pat Lamb. And one of his first trips out, he went to Iran. We were doing proposals on a telex machine, and he won 3 major projects in Iran. Came back, and he was an apprentice salesman, asked the president at that thing, I think Al Valisi was the president of Permuted at that time, and said, "You know, I know I'm an apprentice, but I sold your major projects. I want a commission for these projects." He said, "No, you're an apprentice. You don't get a commission." Then he got up and left and joined this little research company in Boston called Ionics. and that's where we all came from.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of us. Wayne Hopkins, a bunch of us came.
Yeah.
Pat Lamb, a bunch of us came up from Ionics. Yes.
That's right.
From Permuted. Yes.
Permuted of the North.
Exactly.
That's right. That's right.
We,
What do
we
you have
did
a?
well with that.
Do you have? I mean, Eric, you ran around all over the world, and you have any particular stories or anecdotes about some of your trips that didn't turn out exactly the way you planned? Or
No, well,
anything
lots
like it fell off a camel or something like that.
Lots of stories, but I must say one of my most memorable stories is traveling with Bill to South Africa. And I don't remember we go to South Africa. And I think this was Bill's first trip to South Africa. I've been there a few times, you know, selling some, because, you know, part of our market research, you pick up the paper, it says drought in South Africa. And we go to South Africa.
That's right.
We start knocking on doors. So.
We did pretty well in South Africa.
And Bill, we were on South African Airways, and Bill would read everything in sight, because Bill reads everything in sight. And I recall, Bill may not remember this, Bill gave me the advice, says, if you want to get cozy with the stewardesses, look for the closest baby and just grab it, and the stewardess will all come to you. You know, but he read everything on site, everything in the South African way. And when he landed and we started talking to customers, it's as if he was a local. I mean, he just knew all the facts, Springboks, and you just name it. And we did well in South Africa.
Yeah, we did
sold a
very
number of
well.
equipment. I remember that Creel Power Station needed water.
Yeah.
We had 10 Akamite 100s going to Baghdad, and Ralph Jones, who I still contact with, calls me when I was in vacation in Maine, because in those days, because I traveled so much, my wife wouldn't allow me. When we go on vacation, we went to a bed and breakfast, had no telephone in the room, and no hotel, and no TV in the room. So I walked down to the general store. And putting coins in, I'm talking to Ralph, and Ralph said they desperately need 3 Akamite 100s. And we negotiated the deal on the phone, like $4 million, and we got it. And we delivered it, and we built it in 13 weeks.
Well, it was actually, that was a contract, you know, they had me go down. You know, I just got married. I had my wife traveling with me. I had to get from Kuwait City to Johannesburg.
Oh boy.
You know, and it's Ramadan, so we fly Saudi Airlines from Kuwait to Riyadh to Jeddah to Nairobi. It's Ramadan. On those flights, 2 dates and a glass of water was the total food. And when we got to Nairobi, it was so late in the evening that there was no food available anywhere. And so we then flew on that. The next morning we flew down to Johannesburg. But it was quite, you know, but that was one of those jobs where we
Great
had
time in South Africa.
yeah, we actually had a very good time. You know, you have a customer, Eskom, very big customer. They have their own site engineers.
To finish off the story, we're staying at the Rosdale Hotel. Me and Bill. We're having dinner. A woman jazz pianist, and this is when I knew that Bill was an accomplished pianist and loved jazz. And we're finishing our drinks. I finished dinner, and Bill says, "I'll see you in the morning." And then I don't know how late you played piano with the pianist, but it must have been out to midnight. But he was up at 7 in the morning. We were up and going.
I'd forgot about that one. But that's one of the things I still do.
Yeah.
Do you still play?
Yeah.
Do you really? That's great. That's great.
You played at karaoke in Malaysia.
Yes, I did. Yeah.
So there are lots of stories. On
Yeah,
lots of stories.
Because we're
Eddie?
all travelers. You
Yeah.
can see, so.
Eddie, you have anything? I mean, I know that you've got some stories because I've been with you when some of these things happen. So.
Well, you were talking about Doug Brown buying the 7 Cs for. He bought it from a guy by the name of Kent, who used to be a field engineer for Ionics in Libya.
I did not know that.
Really?
Yes.
No, I didn't
Is that
know
right?
Oh, yes. He left Ionics and was working for an English firm for a couple of years there. And then about 10 years later, he shows up, and I have to meet him at one of these meetings. He tells us just how big the world is.
I'll be darned.
Yeah. He was field engineer for 2 years, and then he left because he could make more money for an English firm. I forget exactly which one, in Libya.
Yeah, and then he went to Virgin Islands.
He went to Virgin Islands, started a business, and it got bought by Doug Brown.
Yeah, against his best wishes, I think. I don't think Kemp really wanted to.
Yeah, he didn't want. He was ready to retire.
He was kind of edged out.
No, but everybody it seems to know somebody.
Oh, yeah, sure.
And so if you couldn't find this person, you could talk to Doug, and he'd know somebody else, and you could work your way around.
Doug has a bunch of Ionics people with him.
Mm-hmm. Alan Potter's down there.
Yeah, Alan,
Brian Hernan.
Brian Hernan.
Oh, yes, Brian.
Yeah, Brian's
Oh,
down
Brian's
there.
down there.
Yeah.
Some of the guys from the
Sean
Florida,
Myers is with him.
some of the guys from the Florida.
When you say
organization.
down there, are they living in Florida?
Tampa.
yeah.
Tampa.
And when you look back on your career, Ark, obviously you're still working in the field, so you must be enjoying it. But you ever think what might have happened if you had never entertained being in the water treatment business?
I would have probably still have been with DuPont Chemical Company as a senior engineer, because actually when I was with DuPont at Linden, New Jersey, my colleague who shared the same trailer, his name was Charlie Hopper, Scottish gentleman. He's been with DuPont 20 years, same position, great engineer. But you know how these large companies are. You work 2 years, 3 years here, and they change it this here and here. And would have been probably a lifer DuPont person. But then I got a taste of a smaller company like Bermuda and Ionics, and I would not look back. Just create things is really what I want to do.
And it was, Bill, it was pretty much your whole career, so.
Yeah, well, it was my whole career. I started to work when I got out of college, and when I quit, I absolutely quit. I haven't done anything useful except I'm on one board, but other than that, I don't really work at all.
But and you never regretted it?
No.
Never had a second thought, well, what would happen if I'd gone into the petroleum business, for example?
No. I come from my father and his brothers had a small underwear manufacturing company in Pennsylvania, and it went bust a long time ago, so I wasn't tempted by that.
Plus, the water business touches all these industries.
That's right,
Anyway,
it
so-
does. It does. Ned, you started out in the food business.
I started out in the dairy and food industry and spent several years there as a sales engineer. I went looking for a job, and it was desalting of cheese whey with Foremost Foods. I spent about 3 or 4 or 5 years with Bob Lukasik, and then they were looking for somebody to back up Ted Guile on the International. Then after a while, I probably was 7 or 8 years there, I realized there was a market in the U.S. And with Bill's help, I started running around the U.S. at all different places and built up a complete group, sales and field service and so forth. Very interesting. I was always wondering what happens if I didn't get that first lead of desalting away at Ionics, where would I end up? I have no idea.
You could have been the CEO of Kraft Foods.
Not quite. Wouldn't have gone there.
Bernie, how about you?
Well, yeah,
I mean, you
got-
started off in the wastewater business.
Yeah, I started off working in wastewater, and then went to boiler feed water type of before I joined Ionics. When I graduated, I thought about mining because there was a lot of activity in that area at the time. But I had so much fun in the water business. I still remember, back in the days when I was doing commissioning work in the 70s, in 78, you didn't have mobile phones, you didn't have fax machines, you didn't have telephones, you didn't have computers.
You can actually relax at night.
That's right. That's right.
If you wanted to talk to somebody if you're in the Sahara Desert and you wanted to talk to somebody in Boston, you had to get on that telex machine, and nobody was trained in typing at that time, so it was a hunt and peck.
That's right. That's right. They print out the punch tape and stick it in there. And
I can
away
still
you go.
remember the telex machines, and you could smell the paper burning.
Yeah.
So I think it's been I've really enjoyed what I've been doing, and I continue to enjoy it. I'm more I'm as busy today as I ever was in Ionics.
So I want to thank you all for being here. This has been truly interesting
Pleasure.
and
It was a pleasure.
brought back some memories. You mentioned Cape Coral, and that was when I became an independent consultant. That was my first client. So.
I remember seeing your name there somewhere.
And Bill, I'll always remember your circular slide rule.
Well, somewhere that's still around, but I don't use it very much.
When I retired, I gave him my circular slide rule.
My favorite slide rule is my 10-inch log duplex desi trig.
Your K&E?
Yeah, that I got when I was a freshman at MIT in 1941. So that's a long time
Yeah,
ago.
it's amazing. Slide rules still work,
It still
even
does.
after all these years.
Yeah, it does.
Ed, thanks very much.
Okay,
Appreciate
thank
it. And you and I see each other fairly frequently, so thanks for being here, Bernie. Certainly appreciate
You're
it.
welcome.
Thank you. And that concludes our interview.
Yeah, thank you.